This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time. And this is with Valena Beety, and you are a queer litigator fighting for wrongful convictions of women and LGBTQ folk. And we want to welcome you to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. This is actually going to be we're actually at episode, I believe, 933. Been on the air since 2016. That's tracking on Apple Podcast, that number. And we're glad to have you on the program tonight. And yeah, it's going to be cool. So we've got your link to Kensington Books. That will be clickable. It's kind of a long link. I probably won't repeat it. But yeah, we could probably talk about that main topic, which I'm going to bring up again, the wrongful convictions of queer people. How do they happen? And however you want to start that, let me know.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. And that long link, if folks just want to remember, there's a book that I wrote called Manifesting Justice. So if you have my name, Valena Beety, and you have Manifesting Justice, you'll find it. And it's about how women and queer people are in particular wrongfully convicted. So how do they happen? Basically, at least in the United States, if you want to have your conviction reversed, you often have to prove that you were innocent of the crime, that you didn't commit it. So how do people prove it wasn't Valena who did it? It was Todd. The best way, the 100% proof way to do that is through DNA evidence. So DNA, you can 100% say it's not Valena, it's Todd. Well, most queer people are wrongly convicted in cases where there is no DNA evidence. So this could be a child death case. A lot of women are wrongly convicted in child death cases where it's caretakers, where there's a natural cause of death. This could be sexual abuse cases where there's an allegation of sexual abuse and there's no evidence of it, but the evidence ends up being that the person is LGBTQ. So in those types of cases, where is your 100% proof that the crime didn't occur, that it's a no crime wrongful conviction, and thus that you didn't commit it? So I don't think we've talked enough about how queer people are wrongly convicted where no crime occurred. And I know that may sound crazy to people. How can you be convicted where no crime occurred? Well, think about a house fire where someone dies. Well, it could be that there was a space heater that caught on fire and started this fire, and the person inside tragically died. Or it could be that someone else set the fire intentionally. Well, police are not great at being able to distinguish between whether someone set a fire or whether it was accidentally set or accidentally happened. So if the space heater started the fire and yet they say this is arson, how can you prove, no, it wasn't arson, no, I didn't do this? And that's a no crime wrongful conviction.
Yeah, I think a lot of African Americans we can totally identify because like there's a whole history where like after slavery, in the South,
Oh,
just
yeah.
walking down the street, you would get convicted for walking down the street with no money, and they
Yep.
put you back into an actual back onto the cotton field, and you're basically be like an indentured servant. And they found all these ways to criminalize black people. So I think it's the same kind of playbook that they're using for your queer people that they've always kind of used in America for the other.
Yeah, it's a similar playbook, except for the amount of profit that prisons and governments made and actually continue to make, but definitely made after the Civil War on locking up and incarcerating Black people, particularly in the South, because then they made them work and made them work on the railways, made them work in really
It's free,
dangerous
yeah.
situations, right? And so they made so much money off of it. So you're absolutely right that they made up these Black codes that would only apply to Black people that said, you have to be carrying ID at all time. If you're not carrying the ID you're supposed to, then you'll get a 10-year sentence. Here's an allegation that you stole a chicken. You're going to get 5 years for that. And there's
or like
documented
the
information.
Tulsa riot situation.
Yeah.
Somebody looked. Yeah, I mean, like in Tulsa, the whole Tulsa riot, somebody allegedly looked at somebody or maybe did something that it wasn't even proven. Then they burned all the Black businesses out. And I was like, okay. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of history. But so I think you have allies, where people like, I think that, from my neck of the woods, people who have the same kind of experience in America and continue to have it, we're like, yeah, I can identify with that. I just don't like, the direction that we've seen from this like Supreme Court. That's very hypocritical. You see women's rights taken away, you see, Black rights taken away, you see all kinds of rights being taken away, and then you see there's no accountability for their ethics, where they're hanging out with billionaires and making choices that happen to be what the billionaires want.
Right.
So you're like, okay, well, how do we stand up? How do we all stand up when we see all this like obvious, wrongdoing and wrong-headed decisions? It seems like gerrymandered court decisions.
Yeah.
Like we see people having to really, like if you were taking a law school class and some of the reasons that you would say to overturn Roe or overturn, a lot of these cases, and you gave them to your law professors, I don't know if your professor would have agreed with your rationale. Because they seem to have kind of gerrymandered the law and done something that doesn't seem to be started, to have that kind of, history. It seems to be out of left field or right field.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. They're doing exactly what they want to. And the Supreme Court actually just came down with a decision a couple weeks ago, yet again. So I do post-conviction litigation. So after someone's been, or post-conviction litigation, where someone's already been convicted. So you're trying to get back into court. And the Supreme Court just said, yet again, it doesn't matter if you're innocent. You have to follow these special procedures for a court to even listen to your evidence of innocence. And I find that so ironic that someone who's incarcerated, who has no lawyer, is somehow supposed to know all of these procedures and timelines when we have, as you said, people on the Supreme Court who can't seem to figure out, oh, I should be disclosing these gifts that I get. Oh, I should be following some sort of ethics rules. Like they can't even figure those things out, but they're expecting incarcerated people to follow these specific protocols.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing very, very offensive things. I think to women, like, women have medical situations where they might die, and they're saying forcing you to have the baby. And saying it's a crime if you try to leave, and they're going to put you in jail, or they might put you to death if you try to do something. I'm like, really? They seem very draconian. It seems like they're going back to like the 1700s to justify what they're doing, and it doesn't seem like the 21st century. Even if you look at like their affirmative action case, they say, military academies, it doesn't apply. So he's saying I can go into the Air Force Academy and I can still have affirmative action, but if I want to go to Harvard, I can't do that. So Harvard Business School, but if I want to be a soldier, I want to get an F-16 and bomb people, I can do that. I can still have that protection, but I don't have the protection at Harvard Business School. And that's a really kind of interesting to me. He's like, if it's the rule, how come it doesn't apply across the board?
Yeah. And also, I mean, they're so concerned about affirmative action. And then what is it? So 5% of people who apply to Harvard have they're a legacy, right? Their parents, some family member went to Harvard, and 30% of them are they make up 30% of the class. So overwhelmingly, if your parent went to Harvard, then you get to go to Harvard. But that doesn't seem to matter to this court. Like that type of, affirmative action doesn't seem to matter to the court.
No, because it's about the money, and they're hanging out with the billionaires on the yacht. So I guess that's fine. And I went to Bowdoin, and I ran into rich kids like that were legacy. Their name was on the building,
Wow.
and and I was outperforming them academically. And I'm like, okay, these guys are questioning me. I'm questioning you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
because you weren't really, and then you get the job on Wall Street or you get the job in the boardroom right off the bat, and it
Mm-hmm.
seems like nobody questions that, and that's all natural, whatever. That's natural progression for you. But
Right. You
yeah,
deserved
they don't
it.
seem. Yeah, it just doesn't. It seems the stratification that they want to
Mm-hmm.
create is very top down. It's very aristocratic, very oligarch. Oligarch. Type of behavior. And
Yeah.
so you get these oligarchs, and then you start wondering, like, how come they identify with Russian oligarchs over what they said they believed in? They said they read Menace, but now they don't seem to see a red menace. It's like, it's okay. You're flipping the switch. Because I remember going to school during the Reagan time, and it was all about that. Now they don't seem to care about that.
Yeah, I mean it's so many things. And going back to the repro rights, so in Manifesting Justice, I also talk about women being criminalized for bodily autonomy, right?
Yeah,
For both for abortion, but also for having a miscarriage, so or a stillbirth, and the state with bogus, faulty scientific evidence saying, "Oh no, no, you intentionally caused this." Or there's something from going back to, you said, the Middle Ages. There's something from the Middle Ages called the floating lung test, which is supposed to
oh wow.
determine whether a child was born alive or not. And you take a piece of the lung and put it in water and see if it floats. Well, if it floats, then ostensibly the child took its first breath and was born alive. Well, guess what? Most of the time it floats. Like, it's completely unreliable, but that's going to be your evidence to
That's
say,
not
hey,
very
guess what?
scientific to me.
No, it's not. But you're going to say that this parent killed the child. You're going to base a murder charge on that floating lung test. Yeah, instead of it being a stillbirth.
It seems very. It seems like where did these people start becoming scientists? They're making scientific like decisions based on like bad information. And the thing is, like, then they're taking like groups and subjugating groups that have always historically had issues. Like, the queer people had a lot of issues, all the time until they felt the freedom to kind of stonewall riots. They could get out and really express themselves and start to demand equal treatment. Equal treatment for people was, well, like 1954, 1966, 1965. It's not that, it hasn't been around that long. The
Mm-mm.
Stonewall riots, that didn't happen that long ago. But they're like, oh, we got to put the kibosh on that. We got to stop it. So it's like, we didn't really have a very long run, if you look at it.
No.
It's a very short amount
Yeah.
of time.
And actually, the 1960s and 1970s Black Power movement and queer liberation movement often worked together to challenge the police because they were both being criminalized for their identities. You until 2000, you couldn't be
Yeah.
openly gay. You couldn't have some sort of sex with someone of the same gender without it being illegal and potentially going to prison for it. So there has been a lot of alignment on that.
There's a lot of laws in a lot of states, especially in the South and maybe even the Midwest, that I've been aware of that actually criminalize sex. And
Oh
actually, if
yeah,
they're still on the books,
they're still on
and
the books.
people, if you get some sheriff that decides to do it, it's like they could do it. They could go after you. And it was like,
You are
that doesn't
absolutely
seem
right.
right at all. Do you run into things like that where
Yeah,
people
there's
are actually pulling all those old laws and using it?
There was a Louisiana sheriff who got into the news a couple of years ago because he so regularly did it that he would arrest queer people, LGBTQ people, throw them in jail. And it was so bad that the local prosecutor came out and said, we're not going to be bringing charges on this. This is no longer a crime. Oh, even though it's on the books, it's no longer a crime. And yet the sheriff was like, it's on the books. I'm going to keep arresting people, and again and again and again. So yeah, it absolutely, police have the discretion to do that. And it may not sound as bad if you're like, oh, you're not going to get conviction, but you're still being thrown in jail, which could be for
You're
days.
being harassed. It's harassment.
Oh
yeah. I mean, it seems it's basically you're taking certain groups of people. It's like when I get pulled over, somebody asks me if I own the car, right? And that's like the classic thing that happens to a lot of middle class blacks is like they want to they come after us and they do something like they'll stop you. It's like, oh, do you really own this BMW? Do you really own this Lexus? And my father, my grandfather, my uncles, we're all like, middle class blacks, but we would get hit with this thing driving while black. They're just going to come up and the first thing they ask you, you're not even doing over the speed limit. Oh, and I actually fought it. And then the guy didn't show up. I actually fought the ticket because I went to the judge and say, hey, this guy just asked me if I owned a car and it wasn't even going over. And the state trooper failed to show up. So I said, I tell all my friends, like, challenge it. Because like, why are you going to have to deal with that? I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the police power to pull people over is extraordinarily broad. I mean, they can pull you over for, oh, it looked like you swerved out of your lane. You went over the dividing line. You did a rolling stop. I mean, they can just, we have so many car laws that appear in your car, like the police. So that leads to a lot of racial profiling, just pulling people over because they're black or brown.
Yeah, then it must end up being work if they're tracking somebody from a nightclub and they've got this kind of sheriff mentality and they've been observing. It's like, okay, I found some queer people. I don't like them because my own kind of spiritual beliefs or whatever. And then they suddenly just, bother them all the time. It's like, so yeah, it just becomes, I think it just makes life harder when you already have things you have to deal with and they're going to go and do these wrongful stops. And now you're talking about convictions of people just getting blamed because of their existence. Something happens and they say, well, you must have been, because the person's queer or because they're black or because they're a woman, they must have done it because they got this belief that we're the child, you're like Garden of Eve's to blame, black people is like, oh, you're the sons of Cain. So they got all these kind of, Sodom and Gomorrah. They come up with all these reasons why they suddenly say, well, you must be the most likely suspect.
Yeah. Well, and to go back to what you were first saying, a good friend of mine was living in a small town and there was a lesbian bar and she would leave. And every time she would leave, the police would tail her and would pull her over for something. And it was specifically because she had been at this lesbian bar and she herself was queer. So absolutely, that happens. And in terms of wrongful conviction, so the main story of my book, Manifesting Justice, is about these three women who meet at a drug rehab facility in rural Mississippi. And two of these women, Tammy and Lee, they meet and they fall in love. And they finish the program and they graduate and they're leaving. And this third woman, Kim, asks if she can come with them, and she hasn't been doing as well. And they say yes, as kind people. Well, within 24 hours, Kim has overdosed. So they're in just rural Mississippi, and Lee and Tammy take her to the hospital. She's in a drug-induced coma, and there's a country doctor who thinks that Kim has been sexually assaulted. And so he brings in, he tells the police, but he also tells this is the crazy part. He tells a local dentist and has a dentist come in and examine this woman, Kim, examine her body while she's naked and in a coma, examine her body. And the dentist says that he finds bite marks. And in fact, he says that half of Kim's labia, her vagina, is bitten off. And there's no other evidence of this. There's no blood, there's no visuals, like there's no other evidence of this except for this dentist. But who could have done this? To your point, they're like, oh, well, who could have assaulted her and bitten her? Well, obviously, it's the two lesbians who she's been with. And that's what started their wrongful conviction. But it's these, sadly, imaginary crimes, these no crime wrongful convictions where prosecutors and police can just run with stereotypes about queer people, that queer people are dangerous, that they're deviant, that they're deceptive, and run with that. And, a jury says, okay, this person, I don't know anyone who would do a crime like this. So it makes sense that a queer person would, and they convict them.
Yeah, they're just trying to build up this fear. It's like fear of
Absolutely.
of the other. They
Yep.
if somebody's not like you, they're most. And it was the history in America. Like if you're the next immigrant coming in, you're the Portuguese, you're the Irish, you're different groups come in, Haitians come in, Jamaicans. Anybody comes in, they get blamed for all the crime. They get
Yeah.
blamed because they're the new kid on the block. And then if you're somebody that doesn't look like everybody else, or doesn't behave like everybody, or doesn't believe like everybody else, it's like, oh, it's the atheist that did it. Well, it's the Protestant that did it. It's the Catholic that did it. It's the Jewish person that did it. It's the Muslim that did it. It's like it's always find something to justify your argument because it's like you can't. It's kind of bullying. This bullying, and the whole thing about America, supposedly, it's supposed to be separation of church and state. You shouldn't have these overall ideas that seem to be coming from one side that are not based in fact. Like you said, people are just making things up and pushing their own agenda, and then people not having the strength to actually say, like, is that actually valid? They're just letting kind of the bully run the show like it's high school.
Yeah, well, in the 1980s and 1990s, there was something called in the United States the Satanic Panic, where there were all these criminal allegations that caretakers had been abusing children for satanic ritual purposes. And those were, again, frequently brought against gay men and queer people in general. So there's some, also the San Antonio Four are some well-known lesbians in San Antonio who were wrongly convicted of sexual abuse of two children based on this satanic panic. Someone gets up there and says, oh, they're performing these satanic rituals. They sacrifice these children on the altar of lust, which is just completely made up.
That kind of idea that was even thrown out. Yeah, Hillary Clinton. There's a whole conspiracy about something like that with Hillary, like that Pizzagate or something. They made something up. That something was happening.
When it's like, who are the real child abusers? Oh, it's the Catholic priests.
Yeah, it seems to be a common thread. Yeah, they make these common threads of this thing that they want to say, well, the Democrats and the Dems and the liberals and all these people on the left, they're into this, and it was okay. And then they just put it out there in the media, on their right wing media, and they put it out there with these shock jocks that just say all this stuff, and then people believe whatever they hear from kind of a bullying top down approach, and it gets really concerning when the law doesn't seem to actually stand up. You said, well, the law should take care of that. And, this is where we can talk to your perspective. Is like, you would think that the law is supposed to stop that, but you see people still, playing games.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's how much power prosecutors have. that they can bring charges or not bring charges. I mean, again, like, where have we actually seen sexual abuse documented? It's been among religious leaders, particularly within the Catholic Church, right? Like, that's where we actually see it documented, is among religious leaders.
Yeah.
It's true. But instead, it's queer people, it's LGBTQ people, it's queer people through satanic rituals.
There's a lot of
And
high
there's
powered.
just no justification.
There's a lot of high powered. Yeah, there's a lot of high powered CEOs, CIOs. The people in the upper echelons that you find out they were doing something. If you go check, the whole thing with Epstein, the Epstein situation, he's like, oh, there's like royalty involved, CEOs involved, really high end people. It's not, and it's across the board. It's like these people are like, whether, they're just kind of in this class, and then they're putting on these other classes that are like subjugated classes that are like, they don't deserve that because they're not doing anything. And it's kind of like, okay, like the father said, don't do as I say, as I do, you do what I say. If they're telling you what to do, and then they find out they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Who's
a
actually doing
saying
something.
in criminal justice work: better to be rich and guilty than poor and innocent. That, I mean, if
Yeah.
you are wealthy, you can hire the best attorneys, you can have political influence on the prosecutors to drop the charges. But if you're poor, which most people who end up with charges against them are, which question that right there, then it's just a treadmill to convict people.
It seems like a lot of energy spent on people who are, the most vulnerable members of society getting hit because they are vulnerable, because they're like an easy target to actually fit somebody's agenda. So you have potentially people in political positions like district attorneys trying to create a record to show that they're tough on this, and they want to
Mm-hmm.
have an agenda, and they kind of create a fake, enemy. You make a
Yeah.
fake. You, yeah, it seems like, is that what you see is going on? Is it like at a level where it seems like they're just trying to create this menace, this fake menace?
Well, I think there's two things. One is that as much proof as we have that prisons don't actually stop criminal behavior, that they don't actually change people's behavior, we continue to see that as the only solution for everyone. So it's like, just send everyone to prison. So we don't look at whether what we're doing actually makes our community safer. We don't actually
Hmm.
look at, and that's supposed to be the point of prosecutions, is to create safety. Well, we're not looking at whether we're creating safety. And then the second thing is, there's a theory that our courts and the whole system isn't actually even about guilt or innocence, that it's about tracking people, and it's about tracking particular people. And as you said, vulnerable people. So tracking communities of color, tracking impoverished communities. Because once you charge and then ultimately convict someone, you have this whole system in place to track where they're working, what they're doing. They have to show up to a parole officer. So it's actually about just controlling populations and tracking them.
Yeah, that seems what's going on with, like, once Roe v. Wade was overturned, then you're telling people that women, they're tracking their periods, they're tracking
Mm-hmm.
their movement from state to state, and this is
Mm-hmm.
coming from people who say that you should have freedom, but
Right.
then they're tracking your personal sexual behavior.
Mm-hmm.
They're tracking your personal, like, to me, protected health information.
Oh
You're
yeah.
tracking, yeah, period. Like, what right do you as the government have to track my daughter's period or any woman's period? What right do you have to do that? And what right do you have to track my deciding if I want to go to Boston to do whatever I want to do? I'm in
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi. I decided to go to Boston. You're going to tell me I can't go to Boston and I can't do something? Well, why? That
Particularly to
doesn't.
do something that's legal in Boston,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
so we have these states trying to say, okay, you're in Texas, you can't get an abortion in Texas, but you're trying to go to Boston. Well, we're going to stop you. We're going to still criminally prosecute you.
And that's supposed to be a party that's about individual freedom. But then I guess that's only for certain, like if you're a guy,
Yeah.
he's like you seem to you want to control women to force them to have babies that you don't even want to take care of. You don't want to give people food stamps. You don't want to give them
Right.
health care. So what is the point in bringing children in the world and you don't actually even give them the right medical care, right? Or don't even give them food because you think
Yeah.
you should they're lazy, so you shouldn't have to give them food. So like, okay, you're gonna create all these more people and then not pay for any of it. It seems like
Mhm.
more about punishment to me. It
Yeah.
seems like it's like about control and punishment. You're not really about the sanctity of human life. You're about like trying to control women because you thought the 1960s and 70s. Oh, people got out of control. We got to put a cap on that.
Yeah. There's I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure folks listening will. It's this long study that's been going on for a long time, but about women who carried a pregnancy instead of having an abortion because they couldn't have an abortion, because they chose not to, etc. And it shows how so many things in their life, their economic status diminished, right? They're just all these things that really can impact someone's freedom truly through being forced to carry a child. So that's totally to your point about control.
Yeah, and then the control over saying that we have like a certain governor in Florida is outlawing trans people. He basically that way he shouldn't
Yeah.
exist. He's got
Yeah.
ads saying you shouldn't exist, and that's very dangerous when a political a governor goes and says in ads they believe like a certain people should not exist. I mean that's and then what do you think happens when the police see that? And the state troopers see that, don't they go and try to further that point of view? And then
Well,
you have to deal with the consequences of a lot of people getting hit with people who believe they should do that to these people.
yeah, so we've seen just this year, there's been a huge rise in hate crimes against LGBTQ plus people. There's been, I mean, it's been in the news a lot of places, bomb threats against different bookstores that have drag story hour, where someone in drag reads a
Hmm.
storybook. And I actually, at one of my book readings, I was presenting at a bookstore that had it's called Indie Reads in Indianapolis, and they had a bomb threat because they had drag story hour
Hmm.
and they had to hire a security guard for my book talk, which is, in my mind, like that
Yeah.
should be ridiculous. That because I'm there talking about queer people being wrongly convicted, that people are going to be so outraged that they could potentially do harm to me for speaking about that, to the bookstore for putting on the event. But they, hired a security guard for it. So this is very
I mean,
real.
now you get parents that one parent. Yeah, that's
It's not
very
just
real.
hyperbole. It's
Yeah.
not just um, speech. It's it has turned into actions, and very violent actions against LGBTQ people. And I'm sure you
Yeah.
know this about the advisory, like the NAACP advisory for Black folks
Yeah.
about the dangers of going to Florida. Same thing of there's
Yeah.
been advisories about the dangers of queer people going to Florida, like going to an entire state. I mean, 2 years ago, that would have been ludicrous to me that there's a travel advisory not to go to a state because it could be dangerous just based on your identity. But
It
that's
kind
where
of
we're
feels
at.
like it feels like the '60s. Like if you were in the NAACP and you went down to Mississippi and you were like a white student from a northeastern college, you go down to help with voter registration, you could end up killed. That
Yeah.
was and it seems like it's getting back to that where these people say, yeah, let's bring that Bull Connor stuff back. you know, that's what it feels like to me because they got people, you got the Moms for Liberty, you got these people who are tied to like, very dangerous groups that
Mm-hmm.
are very, like they hit a point, they're like KKK, white supremacist type of people. And they pick one mom to say, let's ban the books about,
Yep.
any kind of gay issue. And then you go to the school committee meeting. If you try to say something, they got some people there that might be, in one of these groups, and they physically threaten people. They cause, they threaten people, they attack people, they call people on the phone, they bomb threats on people who happen to speak out and say, why can't you have a book about Rosa Parks? Why can't you have something
Right.
about the gay liberation movement? Oh, you can't have that because that offends one mom is able to say that offends you, so they take the whole book out. I mean, it's like that to me. How does that make any sense?
Yeah, and it's really sad that it's school libraries and public libraries that are being affected by this. That, I loved my public library growing up. And to think that I would go to, so I grew up in Fishers, Indiana, where the Fishers Library had to remove many, many books because of a series of complaints from a very small group. That I couldn't even read a book where there's a gay protagonist, like a fiction novel, like Melinda
Yeah.
Lau's books. So, like just having a gay character. No, I wouldn't be able to read that. That's really damaging.
Well, it's like they're trying to erase certain types of history to
Yeah.
kind of wash it, and say, there are people who want to get rid of the Holocaust, they want to get rid of the civil rights movement, any reference to slavery, or if
Hmm.
there's a reference to slavery, say we wanted to be slaves. Like, really? Okay. Um, it's like they get rid of anything reference to that gay people, trans people, anybody
Hmm.
that's not within their mindset and their books and their spirituality, and it's totally a violation of church and state, to me. And they don't seem to care, and they're getting these politicians that just totally go past it, and then they criminalize liberal behavior. It's like we're getting to the point where you're criminalizing people for walking while black, walking while gay, walking by being a woman. It's like, okay, so then you got to stay in line. You got to walk the line. Like what is that? Like, why do we have to walk the line?
Well, and what does that even mean? I mean, you can't. Like, if you're, visibly different from whatever their norm is, it doesn't matter what your actual behavior is. And so these, queer stereotypes of, queer people being dangerous and deviant and deceptive, like it doesn't matter how much you fall in line. If those stereotypes are there, they're going to keep being
Yeah.
superimposed on you, on me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they want you to not be. They want you to go back where you didn't come
Yes.
out of the closet. They
Yep.
want you to kind of fake being somebody else. They want you to force this behavior underground. That's my
Yes.
opinion. I think they're trying to force people to have an outward face, to have a mask that they think is acceptable. And if you try to be like in the 60s and the 70s, it was all about being yourself and being authentic. Even like when black people started having afros, then people were like, oh,
Yeah.
you know, hey, baby, you can't be in my company if you have that. Right. And there was a point where it's like, hey, why not? Why can't we want to be what we want to be? Why do we have to perm our hair? Why can't we have an
Mhm.
afro? Why can't we be more like that? And it's the same thing I think with gay people saying I can be who I am. I don't have to hide. And now they want you to kind of hide again. They want you to like, oh yeah, don't show that you're an African American. Show that you're something else. That's
Right.
more, so like Clarence Thomas. Be more acceptable. Be more acceptable. You got to be more acceptable. But
A lot of it's about shame, like just trying to like use shame, like you should be ashamed, and ultimately trying to get people to, as you're saying, self-police, right? Like, oh, let me change my own
yeah, yeah,
behavior because I'm ashamed of my identity. Yeah. But when
yeah.
people
I
won't
just
do
think there's
that,
this.
then they use the criminal
Yeah,
law.
to get convicted. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to do. They're going to punish you. So
Yeah.
like, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, because the court system, and what your opinion as a lawyer is, like, there's a lot of, like, based on what the last president did, he put a bunch of judges in
Mhm.
that have these opinions. And so and then there's a lot of state legislators that have these opinions. So at the local level, and even at the federal level, there's the people that aren't in your corner. There are people who have been put in because of a political ideology to like not be supporting what we knew to be our rights, and our rights to keep on. This is the Supreme Court that's taken away rights, not reaffirming rights.
Yeah, it absolutely, some of the decisions they've made have been so shocking because, as you said, they have taken away rights from people rather than granting rights. So taking away rights of bodily autonomy. Um, uh, and back to your point about like freedom, I was just talking with a friend who said, you know, by using freedom, we get all these conflicting, who's freedom. But if we think instead about collective liberation, if we think about it in terms of that, then it's not just about, the white mom who doesn't want her kid knowing that gay people exist, right? It's instead about collective liberation.
Yeah, that's the kind of confusion they have. It's kind of like an American Taliban that I kind of pointed out that they seem to
Mm-hmm.
not understand. It's like you can have so if you allow certain people's religious freedom takes away the rights of all these other people. So when
Mm-hmm.
does your right of religion actually starts to take away your liberty of this other person, and what standing do they have to tell you what to do in bed? What standing do they have to tell you to do anything about who you are, your race? You can't control that. It's like, so they're gonna go and start making judgments, and they say, well, I have a right to have this belief, and I'm not going to serve you because you're gay. I'm not going to serve you because it's against my religion. So then you take that as, oh, well, you're not going to serve me. Is like, oh, what, the fire department's not going to put the fire out because they don't like me?
So a lot of these arguments we're hearing now about, religious freedom to be able to discriminate against gay people and queer people, I mean, we need to remember that actually before and after the Civil War, a lot of the arguments for slavery um, and for oppressing Black people were also religious and were based in
Yeah,
like religious faith. So just to your point, like when someone's freedom of religion is actually suppressing the liberation of other people, that's uh, that's not what our Constitution's about. That's not what our country is supposed to be about.
because basically what they put out there with that latest kind of decision about the person that was doing the website for wedding planning, which was kind of fake because it
It
never
was
even a
good,
real case. But
right?
the thing I worry about that, you think about it, what if somebody says like black people are the children of Cain, and I don't want to
Mm.
serve black people because my religion says they're the children of Cain, they're evil, which was one of the reasons why
Mhm.
people could say you could be slaves because
Right.
we weren't. It's in the Bible. You can read it that way. So what if there's a sect that says in the future, like, that's how I believe, so I'm not going to serve black people because they're evil? Based on what they did on that case, it seems like you could do that. That they would say that's okay, based the way this court is to me. It seems like they're
Yeah.
saying that that potentially could be okay.
I mean, from the Dobbs decision last summer, where the Supreme Court said, no, you don't have a right to uh, have an abortion, to bodily autonomy. Uh, and frankly, Clarence Thomas laid it out for us, like all of the backsliding of rights, the right to gay marriage, the right to be able to have adult consensual sex with who you wish. And the one thing he didn't include, but which is part of this, is also like interracial marriage and discrimination against people
Yeah,
of
which he's
color,
in.
which he's
he
in.
has
So
an
that whole
interracial marriage,
backsliding, yeah, yeah, he
but
was
he's
like, "Oh,
exempt.
Loving versus
That's
Virginia won't be impacted," and it's like, which is the interracial marriage case. Um, yeah, it will be. Like, it's all part of the same logic.
well, he seems like he would even vote for that because he's so kind of deluded. He does like a self hater to me, but to me, because of his ideology is like over writing any kind of morality. And so he's got
Mm,
this idea, and then he must be see sometimes with these people, they get these ideas that are beyond any kind of common sense, and they seem to be self-serving certain types of groups. And it's like, okay, there's like, where is any kind of standard procedure? These guys have gone, they said they were going to follow precedent. Then they get in,
right,
they don't follow precedent at all.
right. They don't. They don't. In fact, they're moving as quickly as they can to overturn precedent and to change the law.
Yeah, to go against it, which is like, it seems like, okay, can we do a review? But there's no judicial review at their level. 'Cause like, you told Congress that you believe Roe versus Wade was settled law, and then you just overturned it with some kind of like gerrymandered legal decision. To me, that's how I kind of pointed out. It's like you had to go back to the 1700s to find something. It's just the 21st century. You went back that far to find something to make your argument. Really?
Yeah. And
That's
that was
that's good law.
even, and what he did cite was disingenuous as well. So just like ignoring, actually, because there's scholars of that time period now who are like, that's not actually true either. So even what he was quoting was not accurate and was disingenuous. Um, but I, know some folks who
Like,
teach constitutional law, and it's like, how do you even teach constitutional law anymore, right? How do you actually teach students that they should respect the Supreme Court decisions and Supreme Court precedent when the Supreme Court isn't respecting them? It's tough.
well, yeah, it's making our Supreme Court like a court in like, Nicaragua or El Salvador in the 80s, or like in
Mm,
Chile or something. Like you would believe, though, yeah, okay, those are corrupt court, those kangaroo court. That, it's bad analogy for people. It's kind of, but the fact is, it seems like we're sliding into stuff that we've seen before in other places. And it's like, okay, so how are you supposed to demand respect when you don't deserve respect?
well, and to your point, we're sliding back into our own history, right? Our own history of criminalizing queer people, our own history of criminalizing Black people and Black behaviors. Like, we're sliding back into our own history. And that's what
Which,
makes it so dangerous about, no, we can't have books that talk about slavery. We can't have books that talk about queer people, because we're repeating history right now.
I was reading there was a book that's out there. It's kind of like this book like White Lash, and it's actually a book that just came out that says that Barack Obama's election kind of triggered this backlash that kind of forced us back to the 50s or the 1700s. This idea that's like, oh, a black president is like, that's a no go. That's like, okay, the 60s and 70s brought us to that, and oh, that's a big alarming thing in American history. So it brought all these kind of like-minded people kind of in this MAGA kind of mindset. They say, oh, we got to roll all that back because it's dangerous. And it seems like we're dealing with the consequences of it. We tried to take a step forward and it knocked us 20 steps back.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember having conversations with some folks about, well, at least this rips off the Band-Aid. And yes, we are racist in the United States, and there's no more like, you know, pretending that we're colorblind, which is like, again, not the flex you think it is, but there's not the pretending behind that. But it's just gotten so overt and so
Yeah, they're not even scared to
dangerous.
do it. Yeah, it
Right.
used to be like, I went to school in, during the Reagan time, and people were, the Reaganites, I didn't like them, but because they were saying Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. And it's like, I didn't believe that. I was fighting for him.
Uh,
So
yeah.
I was in that time period. And people could go back and they say, oh, I wish I could go back to Reagan times. So I'm like, well, that's kind of like the start of it. Because I remember as a kid in school, I was fighting against those guys, because I saw what was coming. They were saying government was the problem, that having rules that protected people are the problem. And like Newt Gingrich started coming out. We started to see. even back then, the roots of what we got now. So it's been like an evolution of that mindset. And now we're living with the consequences of if you take that and you take it to its logical conclusion, this is where you go. This is why we're starting to lose all these rights.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and it was all supposed to be for like economic benefit. We're going to get rid of all these, social safety nets, and this will help the common
It rules.
person
It
become
rules.
wealthier. And like that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened at all.
And they still got people that thinking that you could do this kind of, this kind of, I don't know, it's supply side economics was the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
They, and even Bush, he called it voodoo economics, but, but then he went on board and said it was okay. But, but the idea they like, oh, somehow the robber baron, the oligarch is going to give you something and you're going to get something. They never seems to happen. They seem to buy another yacht, buy another company. Doesn't seem to actually help the people. The regular people
Move
don't
their
seem to
money
get anything from that,
offshore.
but people still are deluded. Yeah, they're still deluded into thinking that you get a lot of people that don't vote their interest. A lot of
Yeah.
people that are blue collar and they vote for something that's very like it's for this oligarch class, and somehow they think they're going to benefit from the things that the oligarchs are setting up for themselves. But there's like no understanding because then they throw them the bait of, oh, we don't like the gay people, we don't like the black people. So you
Mm-hmm.
throw them those
Mm-hmm.
things and they like it,
Mm-hmm.
and
They're
then
the ones
you
to
don't
blame.
see, yeah, then you don't really see that it's the oligarch that's causing most of your trouble. But he said it was the gay person that caused it. It was the lesbian that caused it. It's the black person that caused it. You didn't see that it's the boss that's actually causing it.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not. It's
all
not
the
the. It's not the person that.
Yeah, it's everyone in America can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. If you just work hard enough, you can become a millionaire. You can become a wealthy person. And if you're not, then it's because of who do you want to blame? It's because of people of color. It's because of gay people. Like that's what's thrown. Exactly what you're saying. But it's all rooted in this if you just work hard enough, then you'll be able to be a millionaire too. And that's just not
Yeah, it's a
true.
Horatio.
Sadly.
Yeah,
Yep.
everybody's gonna be. Not everybody's gonna be Henry Ford. Not everybody's gonna be Bill Gates. It's just not gonna happen. So if you want to make sure, like, so you get people who vote against student loan forgiveness because somehow they've been told by a bunch of oligarchs that that's not fair. When they get deals all the time for their company runs out of business, they get $1 million from the federal government. They get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of corporate welfare all the time. But somebody can't get something at the other level because they didn't work. It's like, whoa, there was Wall Streeters, they lost all your money in 2008, and then they still got to create another company and lose the money again. So, and we bailed them out again. In 2023, we bailed a bunch of people out that had the same kind of problem. Do it again, but you can't give a college kid a break. You can't
Right.
forgive
Somehow
$20,000.
that's a handout,
That's a
handout to
handout,
help someone with
but,
student loans.
but,
And frankly, just going
but the
back to the
Wall
reproductive
Street, it's
rights
not a
thing.
handout.
Yeah. Yes. And going back to the reproductive rights thing, I mean, teen pregnancy, major problem in poor areas. I mean, you look at Mississippi that has, I think, the highest rate of teen pregnancy nationally. So if you have teen pregnancy, what are your job prospects? What are your prospects for pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and becoming that millionaire? Well, it's just going to be a lot harder. You're going to be working a ton, but it's um, probably not going to be the type of money coming in that, as you said, people who um, go to some fancy school and then they get in because they're a legacy, and then they graduate and they immediately get on boards and get these huge fancy jobs. It's just completely set up differently.
Well, it's just trying to understand their concept. They're going to force women to have babies, but they're going to probably be very poor class in the lower classes. So in the modern world, I'm an IT professional. It's highly unlikely that if you force a woman in the poor part of town to have 5 babies, then those babies are going to become programmers. They're going to become like IT professionals. They're probably going to have a hard time even getting it through the day. So how are they ever going? So you think you're not going to go hire the Indian programmer? Not going to go bring somebody in from Australia? You're not going to bring somebody in from West Germany? You're going to bring somebody in that knows how to do it. And they went to school. They went to a college. Their
Right.
government helped them pay to go to college.
Right.
But this kid may have 5 kids. They didn't get to go to school, and they don't have
No.
good math scores. So where like you think you're going to force like the immigrants not to come, you're actually going to cause more of them to come.
Interesting. I
I don't
hadn't even
see
thought
how
about
you
that.
yeah, I don't see how you're going to generate the workforce that you think, because you're not giving them, you're not thinking it out. You're not giving the schools the tools to teach them. You're not giving them the diet so they can have a good mindset, because they're going to be malnutrition. Means you're not going to have as good an opportunity because you're not going to be healthy. So you look at I was a sociologist. I look at numbers. I look at the process and see what your policies do to the overall macrocosm. That their plan doesn't look like it works to me at all. So I don't know what they think they're doing.
I know. We've talked about like a whole world of major problems here. It's so true.
Yeah, but I think it's like the whole wrongful conviction of queer people is like part of a whole system of
Yeah.
inequality that's
Yeah.
getting more and more. That the difference between like an executive like can be so many times, million, like thousands of times like your paycheck, right? You
Yeah.
go to other countries in like in Japan, it wasn't like that. The CEO wasn't that like 10,000 times the salary of an average person. It wasn't like, we're getting the inequality gap is causing these kind of things where people can look at people from different groups and they go, let's play that game. It's like a balance of power game. Let's go and make these boogeymen. Like let's create like the queer people problem. They're the
Mm-hmm.
cause. So we
Yeah.
don't have to. Nobody looks at what we're doing, and
Yeah.
it's just it's good that you're out there defending people, because people need it.
Sadly, yeah. I mean, again, like better to be rich and guilty than poor and innocent. Just so much of it comes back to that within criminal justice. Um, and I hope for anyone who's been listening, that you'll pick up my book, Manifesting Justice, if you want to know more about queer people being criminalized, wrongful convictions of queer people, but also wrongful convictions of women and their reproductive rights. That's in here too. The bogus, like faulty forensic science, junk science that's used to convict innocent people. And particularly if anyone is picking up the book and interested, would love to have hear from you, hear what you think about it, and feel free to write on Goodreads or Amazon what you think about it too.
Yeah, and I'll put that link back up, and that will be fully clickable. So if to let everybody know, when the podcast is published on all the platforms we're on, from iHeartRadio to Amazon to Apple, that link for your book is actually fully clickable, and it'll click through.
Oh,
So
great.
that right now you can't click on it, but people who go and check out the podcast, even on Facebook and YouTube immediately after that, that link is clickable on Facebook and YouTube once we're off the air. That link that you have, and I'll send you that to your background. I'm going to create a landing page for your audience where everywhere the podcast can be found, people can just listen or watch on the platform they want, and then they'll be able to kind of look at that and click through and get into it more, get into it deeper.
Well, thank you for that. And if you click on this link, you can get the book
So thank
from
you.
your
Well, thank you for
favorite
being on the.
local bookstore or anywhere. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Oh, so it's a link for anywhere you can get the book.
Yeah. Yeah. From that link, you can, if you want to do Amazon, you can, but you can also do your local bookstore.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, because people so it's actually available in print. It's not just online. So that's
Yeah.
for people who still want the physical copies, because I'm into that. But thank you again for being on the podcast. This hold on after we get off, because there's a recording process that's going. But yeah, thank you again for being on tonight. I think it's a very informative discussion, and getting into an area where we like to have open discussions, and I hope people enjoyed it. And thank you again for being a guest on the Family Elected Ghost podcast.
Thanks for definitely having me. Really appreciate it.